Good morning and welcome to WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick, and a lot's been ticking. New Haven's Michael Lawler has been making our city and state tick for longer than many of our listeners have been alive, or at least paying attention to news. I would say that in 1 hour, Michael Lawler forgets more about criminal justice and law than people like me and others have learned in our entire lifetime. Mike has been a prosecutor, a leading state legislator, a top state official in charge of criminal justice policy. These days he's teaching at UNH, and he's hitting the hustings for Democratic presidential candidate, ready? Pete Buttigieg. Mike is in the WNHH studio to tell us all about that. Well, thanks for stopping by, Mike.
Hey, Paul, no problem. And by the way, it's the University of New Haven, because our branding has had to change because the University of New Hampshire gets the UNH designation.
Okay, so we're not supposed to say UNH anymore.
No, University of New Haven. Thanks very much.
I think they should stop saying it in New Hampshire.
Well, maybe someday.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you close to the mic.
Yep.
So, Mike, you're the guy to ask about this. So, in just 3 weeks, 3 different civilians have been shot dead by cops. And obviously, every case is its own story. We've been focused most in New Haven here about Mubarak Suleiman, who was had a knife. He was in a car. The window was up. Cop fires 7 bullets in. What do you think about all this?
Well, it's pretty serious stuff. The good news is that in recent years, the way the system responds to these shootings has evolved a lot. It's changed a lot. I think in the good old days, before there were body cameras or other forms of oversight over police behavior, a lot of this basically got swept under the rug, and you didn't really know all the details. And I'm sure in the good old days, the police were able to sort of invent their own storyline about what led up to the shooting. But that's much more complicated today. And I think, as we saw in the recent shooting, which took place in West Haven, right by our campus, actually,
that's right.
The body cameras really help you to understand what happened, and will certainly help the investigators dissect what, if anything, to do about it.
So, Mike, as I said, you forget more in an hour than I learned in a life. I've been watching this issue since the Malik Jones case when you were an East Haven legislator in the 90s, right?
Yep.
And I would say 3 big factors have changed it. Body cams is the biggest change because we watched this guy fire the bullets. I would say that Black Lives Matter and a broader push for accountability from police have changed things. In the past, they were not required to release any information within 96 hours. Now they have to do the body camera, and state police are releasing information within days that never got released. And the third thing I would say is the legal system. This I want to get into the weeds with you on. What they consider an officer responsible for or not has changed so much. And I'm thinking about the Malik Jones case, where a black young man was in East Haven. The cops got a report that some black guy was driving there. They follow him. They didn't know who he was. He was involved in criminal activity, but they didn't know that. They followed him high speed, like 70, 80 miles an hour, over the Q Bridge into New Haven, treacherously down New Haven streets, Grand Avenue, box him into a lot. Cop runs out of the car up to him, jumps on top, and then shoots him point blank. And then says he gave me a go to hell look, so he kept shooting, killed him. And to this day, police deeply support this guy. East Haven police promoted the cop. Everything from doing the chase to he felt, and they said on the legal basis, I remember talking this with both state and federal prosecutors, They said, well, all that matters is the last second if he had reason to believe his life was dangerous. His life wasn't in danger, but the car was rolling 5 miles an hour that he had boxed in, so he said he was worried to get run over, and he saw a go to hell look. So because he's a white guy who's scared of black people, he thought that meant he was going to get killed by an unarmed man. I don't think they accept that anymore. When I looked at the officer who got arrested in Hamden for coming into New Haven and shooting unarmed people in a car, they didn't say, well, if he had some reason for thinking it was upset, that's okay. Everyone was saying it's not okay that he didn't follow procedure and how he stopped, then went up to the car, created a dangerous situation, started firing. Am I right about those 3 factors?
Well, there's a fair amount of editorial content in what you just said, but
de-editorialize it.
Yeah. One frustration I've had over the years, and I'm going to digress just a little bit, but it's in part to answer your question. You know, what happens in the aftermath of a police-involved shooting, a fatal shooting, or any kind of death at the hands of the police, there is an obligatory investigation that takes place, which is overseen by a prosecutor from a different part of the state. That's state law. That's how it's supposed to happen. And
Pat Griffin's doing this one. He's not a different part of the state. They moved it from London to West Haven.
No, the West Haven one is being done by Mike Gaylor, who's the state's attorney in Middletown. It was originally
New London,
the New London guy, and now it's the Middlesex guy. So by state statute, it cannot be the local prosecutor,
and that's a change.
That is a change, one of many, right? And but so there's a technical issue here, and you got at it just a moment ago. And the technical issue is it or is it not a crime that was committed by the police officer? So it's a homicide, and in fact, if you shoot and kill somebody intentionally, it's a murder, except you have the option of arguing self-defense. And once you argue self-defense, under Connecticut law, and the law in most states, is that the question is, did you reasonably believe your life was in danger when you pulled the trigger at that second, as you said? And under Connecticut law, if you raise that defense, then the obligation falls upon, the burden falls upon the prosecutors to disprove your defense beyond a reasonable doubt.
And the reasonable is the key word there.
Correct.
Because is it reasonable to run up to someone who doesn't have a weapon and then create a dangerous situation? You jump on the roof and start putting a gun through the window. And then if the person has a face you don't like, or the car rolls back 5 miles an hour, that's reasonable to think your life's in danger, so it's okay to kill him. Well, that's what happened in East Haven.
No, I understand that, but I'm just explaining what the law says.
Yeah.
What the law says is that if you claim that you acted in self-defense using deadly force, then the burden falls upon the state to disprove beyond a reasonable doubt your claim that you reasonably believed your life was in danger.
And again, reasonable is the key word, right?
Correct. And that's a jury decision. And so in these analyses that the prosecutors are required to make, they have to make a determination whether or not they can disprove beyond a reasonable doubt the affirmative defense of self-defense in that case. I know this is hyper-technical law school stuff.
No, it's key
but
stuff.
It's really difficult.
That's the nub.
Correct.
Because police have difficult jobs. Their lives are in danger. We give them the benefit of the doubt, and they deserve the benefit of the doubt.
So
when it goes over the line is when we worry.
Correct. And so let me just add parenthetically, California, for example, has just changed their rule governing use of deadly force by law enforcement, right? And it's a new law, just took effect on January 1st in California. It makes it less easy for a police officer to claim self-defense in one of these situations. And I know that that's under discussion here in Connecticut, and that may very well take place.
So given the current law, do you think any of these 3 recent cases were murder?
Well, so obviously I don't know the whole story in these cases. I saw the videotape. I think having spoken to a lot of people in law enforcement since the West Haven incident happened, I think it's more likely than not that trooper is going to be charged with a crime as a result. And obviously the principal crime would be homicide or murder. So my guess is that's more likely than not at this point, although I can't speak, obviously.
And what do you base that on?
Because at least the reaction from other law enforcement professionals have seen that, say that nothing that was obvious in the videotape, at least, could have allowed someone to reasonably believe their life was in danger or someone else's life was in danger. Keep in mind that the The car, as it appears in the videotape, the driver's in the seat, right? There's been no indication up until that point that he has a firearm, although there was an indication he had a knife. The window is closed. Apparently, he's not able to open his driver's side door because he's sort of boxed in by the police car next to it. And there's another officer on the other side who's broken through the window and has deployed a taser, apparently with no effect. But the only way that the trooper, I think, could reasonably argue his life or someone else's life was in danger, or by the way, it's death or serious bodily injury. So I suppose if he reasonably believed that the other officer was about to sustain a serious bodily injury or be killed, then that would be an example of a self-defense claim in that situation. But you don't really see it there. Obviously, the investigation will figure out more detail there. But the point I wanted to make originally, and I think this is really important, is these technical decisions that prosecutors have to make, whether or not to charge a crime, whether or not you could overcome a self-defense claim, is one issue. But in almost all of these incidents, including the Malik Jones case in East Haven, what led up to it is a central factor. And whether
I was told it didn't. That was what we were arguing back in 1997 when this happened, that the police created it by doing an out of control search that ramped up a chase, then boxing him in, then running up to the car without backup or calming down the situation, then pointing a gun in a windshield. And they all said none of that matters. No, but you're saying it does matter.
It doesn't matter in terms of whether or not to charge the officer with a crime. It does matter into whether or not this was preventable, whether the training was inappropriate, whether the officer was following the training, that type of thing. Because in almost all of these shootings that you've seen recently in Connecticut, there appears to have been either bad training or an officer not following the training. Because as you just pointed out a minute ago, in what they call a felony stop situation, you're supposed to wait for backup. You're not supposed to get close because you might end up getting killed. And so stay clear. And so like in this case in West Haven, again, I don't know the whole story. I'm just saying in general, if you don't need to be that close to a person who may pose a threat, then don't get that close. If they don't pose a threat.
That's what I was hearing from officers with whom I disagree about some of this stuff. They said everything done in that was wrong. But that gets me back to the Malik Jones case. And then, you follow East Haven because you live there for so many years. You elected to office there. It took the Justice Department to come in and blow the whistle. They fought with that department the way they fought with departments in the South when their lives were threatened for investigating that department, finding that they were inventing cases against people they just wanted to beat up and then covering it up. And people went to jail for that.
Right.
But so if you have a state police force, which is a bunch of cowboys who conduct a chase that 3 other departments chose not to conduct in this West Haven case, and then you have a history, like we had a history where state police investigated a case here after Trump was elected. Some cops set these vicious dogs into a crowd with old men with unarmed and cops got bit. And after all that, that cop was cleared and didn't even talk about, well, maybe we'll do retraining. And that cop became the person who came to investigate other cases here. How can we trust the state police to investigate themselves?
Well, I mean, those are good questions, right? And I think, from my perspective, the rules that govern how police conduct themselves, the kinds of training they go through, the kinds of hiring criteria that are used, I mean, all these are very important. And for example, where I teach now at the University of New Haven, we are very much directly involved in developing sort of best practices type training curriculum for police. And
what would you tell people based on this best practice? What kind of best practices would you invoke here so these incidents don't happen?
Well, I mean, you got so in the West Haven case, you got a combination of issues. You got a high-speed chase on the highway. Which
would you not have done that one?
I don't know the whole story here, but I mean, there's a lot of departments that have very clear policies against engaging in a high-speed pursuit because
you have to say unless there's a greater danger someone's going to be hurt if you don't chase.
Yeah, right. Or I mean, and
that you can't catch them down the road.
And you have to compare that to the actual crime that you're responding to. So, for example, the New Haven Police Department has a very long-standing policy. They're not going to engage in a high-speed pursuit for example, going through a stop sign or something like that because people get killed. Not just the people being pursued, but
other people say, well, he had a knife and he carjacked. So is that a reason you need a high-speed chase, or could you just catch him down the road by radioing other officers?
You could do that, right? There's some indication that this particular guy was doing this weaving in and out of traffic before there was a pursuit underway.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is posing a danger, and you don't really know what the whole
In
story.
that case, does it pose more of a danger to chase him when he's driving that way?
In general, it does, yeah. So, I mean, again, going back and analyzing what happened here step by step is something I'm not prepared to do.
Okay, so that's one thing you do about high-speed chases. What's some other best practices you'll be looking at?
Well, don't put yourself in, if you're a police officer, don't put yourself in harm's way like that. Don't get that close to the car unless it's absolutely necessary. And so I think when you have the car penned in, obviously the person's acting erratically, he's backing, going back and forth, and this happened in Bridgeport last year. There was a similar incident where
Jason Blair, or no?
Yeah. And they had, I mean, my recollection of that one is the car was like banging into cars. They had him penned in, and the police just went right up to the car.
So what should they do? Call for backup?
Stand back and wait. Stand back and wait. I mean, unless somebody pulls out a gun and starts shooting.
So, Mike, when people who are critical of the police take on these cases, I find they're not always consistent either. They want officers fired without due process. So people who normally think unions are important kind of think cops should not get union protection in these cases, just editorializing here. But also, the critics tend to be people who don't think we should lock up so many people, which you had the number one job there in the Malloy administration, not to lock up so many people when there are other ways that are better for society. So a lot of times, in some cases, I can see you charge a cop with murder. But if the case is that they created a dangerous situation through not following training, I'd like to see departments take other measures, but to take them. Like, don't let him be a cop. Like, I like what Yale did. I thought Yale handled their officer well in that officer-involved shooting because he shouldn't have been fired. He thought he was getting fired on by people, right? And he did some bad stuff with training, though. He should have called for the backup and all that. I'd like to see them be a little firmer about solving problems and truly improving training rather than mouthing it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's like my philosophy on the criminal justice system as a whole, right? If all the focus is on what's the best way to do punishment, I think you're missing the point. The whole point is how to have less crime. And so there's a lot of different strategies to accomplish that goal, and I think we've done a great job here in Connecticut. But it's the same with this topic of police officers and potential police misconduct. This has to do about who's being hired, how they're being trained, how they're being supervised, what kind of transparency there is for the oversight.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of progress on those topics, and half the reason we're having this discussion now is because all this transparency does exist, and people are able to see these things. And due process is important. Police have a tough job, but you mentioned I was a prosecutor way back in the day. I was hired in 1983 by Arnold Markle, who at the time was
still trying to live beyond the Black Panther case. You know,
exactly.
For something else. Yeah.
But I remember very clearly Mr. Markle, who was the state's attorney for New Haven. He used to do in-service training for both prosecutors and local police. He would make them come to the courthouse after hours, and he would train on issues like search and seizure and these types of issues. And one of the talking points he made very clear in his argument was the worst thing in the world is a bad cop, because bad cops undermine the credibility of the entire criminal
justice. That's why so many
system.
officers are upset about this. Dan Garrett writes in, thanks for listening, Dan. Would you have engaged in a high-speed chase? The answer is no. Chase never should have happened. Innocent people can be killed by both the police officer and the suspect. Then the police chase ends up with 7 bullets being fired at point-blank range, ending a life. Totally unacceptable. It is acceptable to let you know that you're listening to Mike Lawler, former top state official on criminal justice, former top state legislator on the Judiciary Committee, former prosecutor, and current professor at University of New Haven, not UNH, and a fan of candidate Pete Buttigieg here on Dateline New Haven, WNHH-FM 103.5, live stream newhavenindependent.org. So, Mike, before we get on to the next topic, I'd like to give you a minute to give us the stats of what you accomplished as Daniel Malloy's chief advisor on criminal justice in terms of how many people were in jail and prison before you started and how people are now and why.
So Daniel Malloy, not Daniel. Oh my God.
I said Daniel.
You said Daniel. Yeah,
right.
That's all right. That's all right. So it's very interesting. You know, like my main argument whenever I speak on this general topic is like, people have to decide, what is your goal? What is your criminal justice goal? And in our administration, the goal was reducing crime. And that's how you measure everything. And so as a result, we know that whether it's directly or indirectly resulting from the various policies that were implemented, there's just a lot less crime in Connecticut now than there was 10 years ago.
Like, what are the numbers?
It's down about 35% in terms of reported
violent crime?
All crime, especially violent crime. Actually,
Over a decade.
Oh, yeah, over a decade. For example, the FBI every year publish data about reported crimes by category. So we're not talking about how many people get arrested. We're talking about how many crimes are actually reported to the police, regardless of who committed it or whether they're ever arrested. And the biggest reduction in the rate of reported violent crime over the past 6 years in the country had been Connecticut. We were just surpassed by New Jersey, but we're just behind them at number 2. Only about 13 states in the country have had a reduction in reported violent crime over that 6 or 7 year period. And so it's been a very dramatic reduction, including here in New Haven. And as a result, there's just a lot fewer people getting arrested. And as a result, there's a lot fewer people incarcerated.
But you've also not just had few people arrested, you're having people not in prison as much, correct? Didn't we change that policy as well?
Well, for sure.
Incarceration policy, second chance.
Correct. Yeah. So, for example, all of the mandatory sentences associated with possession of narcotics were eliminated. The penalty for possession of narcotics was reduced from a 7-year felony down to a misdemeanor. And we have virtually nobody incarcerated today simply for possession of drugs, let alone marijuana. So that's true. Plus, there's been a myriad of changes.
So what did the census go down from over the 10 years?
So at its peak, Connecticut's prison population was just about 20,000 in 2008. And this morning, it's 12,400.
You check it every morning the way some people do the weather?
I do, every single morning. I think it was 12,406 or something this morning.
Well, that's a good result. Do we need to keep doing that, or do we need those 12,000 people behind bars?
Well, what we're doing is reducing crime, right? So the less crime that's committed, the fewer people are going to end up in prison. But the most encouraging...
But also bond and bail, right? And I always mix those two up. We do have people behind bars only because they're poor. Yeah,
there's about 400 people, 450 right now, who are sitting in jail, pre-trial, not convicted of anything yet, whose total bond is less than $20,000, which means
they can't come up with $2,000.
Yeah. Now, some of those people are probably in there more or less voluntarily, hoping to get a time-served sentence in court. But there's a lot of people who are basically. I mean, if you have a credit card or a job or a family or anything, you can post the $20,000 bond. It costs you like $1,000.
So this is just being in prison for being poor, and then you get other problems put on top of it. You can't go to your job. You can't. So New York's phasing it out. Some in law enforcement are concerned. They feel that people and there have been some high-profile cases recently who've otherwise been bonded are now out committing more crimes. But again, it's just being determined by how much money they have, right?
Well, so New York's law just took effect on January 1st. If I was going to point to a model, I would point to the New Jersey law that took effect like 4 years ago. The difference is, under the New Jersey law, they basically outlawed money bail altogether, with some exceptions. But they allowed for what we call preventive detention. That's being held without bail. But in order to do that, you have to present evidence in court that somebody's either a danger to the community or a flight risk. And when I say flight risk, I mean like heading to Canada, not oversleeping for a court date. So they've cut their pretrial population in New Jersey down by about 75% over just a few years. The New York law is not quite like that, right? It makes it almost impossible to set money bail for a pretty long list of types of offenses. And now you open the door to these arguments that you're seeing on TV from police and prosecutors and others that, we can't lock up dangerous people. So, but my guess is, even although I would prefer the New Jersey approach, crime is going to continue to go down in New York, and all these boogeymen that people are throwing out there are a year from now, you won't be able to prove it. But the point I wanted to get on the prison population, I think this is really, really important. Not only is the prison population down generally by like about 35%, but it's especially down among the youngest inmates. And when I say down, I mean down by a lot. So, for example, the number of young people between the ages of 18 and 21, that's a 4-year spread, who've been arrested, has dropped 70% just over the past 10 years. And the number of people in that age cohort who are incarcerated today in Connecticut, sentenced, unsentenced, altogether, is down about 66%.
So the number of people 18 to 21 incarcerated has gone down 66%.
And the number of people getting arrested in that same age cohort is down about 70%. So that's the school to prison That's the school to prison pipeline being shut down in Connecticut. It's very dramatic. And it's because of that, we anticipate in the next 5 years or 10 years, the prison population will be reduced dramatically.
That's good news. And that good news on Dateline New Haven, 103.5 FM, live stream, newhavenpen.org, and WNHHFM. Mike Lawler. Mike, are we? Oh, and Bob McCormick says, does Mike think trucks will have to pay tolls?
I do.
All right. Thanks. Mike, are we talking about a crime these days in the trial everyone's watching in the U.S. Senate? Donald Trump was impeached by the House. Now he has a trial everyone believes will lead to his acquittal. Some people say high crimes and misdemeanors doesn't mean crime. Alan Dershowitz did a 180. He used to say it doesn't have to be a crime under what the founders intended. Now he's a lawyer for Donald Trump saying it does have to be a crime. What's at stake? What's happening? Is it a crime, and should he be removed from office?
Well, Alexander Hamilton and the other folks who wrote the impeachment provision into the Constitution said it doesn't have to be a crime. It says it has to do with the fundamental integrity of the government. So malfeasance by someone who's running the government, I mean, that's a whole long story.
Have you ever worked for any politician or support any politician, elected official, whose opponents could not come up with something that says this is about the fundamental integrity of the office and use that as a reason to impeach him? Like Bill Clinton lying about having sex with an intern.
Yeah. So,
I mean, can anyone basically be impeached if their opponents want them to?
Anybody can be impeached if you can get the majority of the House and 2/3 of the Senate to do it. I mean, it's just the way it's designed. And I was in the middle of the Rowland impeachment, right? I was a member of that impeachment committee.
And Bob asked, we support President. We already said it's Pete Buttigieg. We'll get back to that later in the show. Thanks.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was on the Rowland impeachment committee, so I was in the middle of this and learned a lot. And
what did you learn from that?
Well, that, what is the whole purpose of impeachment? The whole purpose of impeachment, as it relates to a governor, for example, is to, fix a broken government. I mean, if you get to the point where you have a chief executive who has lost credibility, has lost legitimacy, who is engaged in basically corrupt behavior, then, you need to consider whether or not you need to get him out of there just to protect the integrity of the government. And, we've seen this happen in various states. I think I sent to you, Paul, a op-ed I wrote about the impeachment of Blagojevich, who was a Democratic governor out in Illinois, and that ended up he was removed from office by the Senate. I think it was all but one senator voted to remove him because of basically corrupt activity. It doesn't mean
it was taking kickbacks in the case of Rowland and burying gold coins under the ground. My favorite part of Rowland that never came out of that was so the argument was that these big contractors like Tommaso were giving money to Rowland and his friends in the form of gifts and in some cases cash to get big no-bid contracts, right?
Yeah, well, he went to prison for that, but the point is, apart from that, which is bad enough, the decisions he was making were undermining the government of the state of Connecticut.
What kind of decisions?
Well, for example, to build CJTS, the Connecticut Juvenile Training School. I mean, that's a long story, but that was like Exhibit A in why this is hurting the government of the state.
And he did it because Tommaso was going to get the contract no bid, and he was going to get money from it. We didn't need it.
He did it because he didn't care, and Tommaso was friends with this architect who had built this prison, not for juveniles, but for young adults in Ohio, and they just basically photocopied the blueprints and built it in Connecticut, even though it was completely inappropriate.
So some people argue that if you make that conclusion, but then you find some other basis to impeach a president or governor on, you're not doing the harder job that's more necessary to make a case to voters that you don't want corrupt government and have them just not vote for the person.
Right, but the problem is at some point you get to the point where that you have to take this action now to protect the government, and I think, I mean, that in my opinion,
is that where we are now?
In my opinion,
Trump?
Sure, yeah.
And why is that?
Well, I mean, it would be a long discussion, but I think his ability to lead the country, lead the government is extraordinarily compromised. I think
because of Ukraine, or because of his tweets?
I think Ukraine is the case in point that we're talking about. But I think he's fundamentally unfit, constitutionally unfit to actually be the commander in chief or the chief executive of the country. But that's my political view, right? But let's just take the Ukraine scandal. For what it's worth, I know a lot about Ukraine. When I was in college and grad school, I studied East European Soviet studies. I've been to Ukraine. I did my master's thesis on Ukrainian nationalism.
Oh, yeah?
In 1982.
And it's pretty anti-Semitic, right?
They are, yeah, for sure. I mean, the whole part of the world is Poland, Hungary.
And yet they have this Jewish president comic.
Yeah, well, I mean, things have changed there, right?
The world is so funny.
Yeah, it is funny. But so I know a lot about Ukraine, and ironically, of all the former Soviet republics, maybe including the Baltic states too. It's an actual democracy at the moment. I mean, they had governments that were unpopular, they got voted out, and they actually left office voluntarily, and that's not the kind of thing you typically see in that part of the world. And so they're now caught in the middle of this shoving match, which has really nothing to do with them directly. It's President Trump trying to get a press conference indicating that they're investigating his principal political opponent. And so in that particular case, unlike sort of the Russia collusion investigation, we saw the smoking gun first,
right?
The transcript of the phone call, and then all the context has been filled in since then. It's like the reverse of the Russia collusion thing. Well, forget about Watergate for a second. The Mueller investigation, we had all the context, but we didn't have the smoking gun. Imagine if you had in August of 2016, Trump on the phone with Putin saying, do me a favor, here's what,
Or Trump going on TV and saying, please release emails, and then they do.
Yeah, but if you had a transcript of him saying it directly to Putin. And
Wasn't he saying it directly to Putin when he was in that debate?
I'm talking about an actual conversation.
Okay.
That would be the smoke, because they said, Trump was saying, like, all these other guys are doing the stuff, it wasn't me. And but I mean, this is just one example of, I think, many of how the government of the United States has been undermined. And this is not like a conservative versus liberal thing. This is not a political thing. I mean, it is a political thing I'm a Democrat, I'm a liberal Democrat, and I wouldn't vote for Trump under any circumstances, but I do think the time has come to remove him from office. And I wouldn't say that if there wasn't overwhelming evidence that he is unfit to be the president of the United States. It's not a question of ideology.
But he's not going to be removed from office.
Well, that's what probably not if the vote was held today, for sure. But what we learned in the Watergate, which you just mentioned a second ago, I think we're both old enough to have remembered that as young teenagers. It was only the last couple of weeks that the tide turned. There was revelations, and then Nixon's biggest supporters turned on him.
It did seem like in those days. First of all, Nixon, we didn't like him. He didn't like Jews. He was kind of willing to break the law. He was quite an able statesman when negotiating with China and Soviet Union. He was quite an able policy person with a mix of motives. And I still believe part of what that was a time when people from both parties elected to office did feel they owed something to the Constitution and the law, which is not true now. And also, it was the drip. Okay, there's a break-in. Okay, now it turns out there was some connection between the White House and the burglars, right? McCord and Gordon Liddy, and then there were these tapes. Oh my God! Now there are tapes, and now we're hearing the tapes. And now John Dean's coming out and saying the president, sanctioned crimes. We're not having that drama here.
But the tapes were right at the very end. I mean, the break-in happens in June of '72, right? And Nixon resigns in August of '74.
Yeah.
And it was, it really got bad.
I just don't see Trump leaving under any circumstances. Given, the Billy Bush tape, any politician in America would have been career over, right?
I think, we have examples, Nixon, Rowland, and others. I think
we have a comment from New York Independent, but I don't think it's New York Independent. I think it's Harry Droz. So I'm going to ask that he use his name when he posts stuff. Thanks.
So I think when the pain of staying outweighs the pain of leaving, that's when people resign.
Yeah.
And who knows what's about to happen. Maybe nothing, and he'll be acquitted.
So you still think it's possible?
I think it's possible that the sky could fall in on Trump based on the sequence of events.
You think it would be John Bolton?
Well, yeah, and plus some others. Obviously, there's a lot of level-headed, responsible people that had been around him over the last few years who probably know a lot of stuff and may or may not decide to. Interesting.
And Harry Jones mentions that in Federalist Papers number 65, Alexander Hamilton also warned against the dangers of partisan impeachment.
Correct. Yeah. It can't be a partisan impeachment. You need 20 Republicans to take him out. Yeah. So that's not happening.
So you think it's still possible Trump will be gone?
Yeah, it's a remote possibility.
Would he then run for re-election?
If he resigns, he can run for re-election. If he is removed from office by the Senate,
which isn't going to happen.
But if it did happen, part of that outcome is you're barred from ever holding public office again.
Huh. Well, that's interesting. Michael Owen knows a lot about impeachment. He's here telling us about it at Dateline New Haven 1345 FM, SteveNewhaven.org, WNHH-FM. So I also wanted to ask you about Pete Buttigieg. Now, you describe yourself as a liberal Democrat,
mm-hmm.
and you're running you're supporting some of the Democratic presidential policy, who is considered a moderate alternative to leading liberals, or in one case socialists, who want to do universal health care now with government single payer plan, or in a few years who want to have free college for everybody, not just the poor. What is your take on that? Why are you for the moderate?
So first of all, let me just make it clear. I'm a big cheerleader for Mayor Pete, but I am not part of the campaign.
Are you not? You're not doing any work for him,
other than going to fundraisers and,
Okay.
and being obsessive on social media. No, and so I'm not speaking on behalf of the campaign. I'm
Yeah.
telling you what I think. And so let me just start by saying,
Oh, so you're not going to any? You're not doing any like phone banking or going to New Hampshire or anything?
not yet, no.
But you might eventually, or
It'd be fun to go to New Hampshire. I did it for Bill Clinton in '92, but there's just too much stuff going on here. So
Sam Hadman says moderate alternative is code word for Republican. Whoa.
there you go. So
I don't think people read as Republican.
yeah,
Thanks for
well,
listening, Sam.
I mean, let me just say this: before I decided who I wanted to support, which is like a year ago, I had in my mind the ideal candidate. So relatively young, not from one of the two coasts, ideally some military experience, and some credible faith-based history.
Well, he's strong on all those.
Yeah, and so then he emerged, and of course, the frosting on the cake is he happens to be gay too, which is awesome.
Mhm.
And so he's one of those guys, like I knew of him, but I never really heard him speak or anything like that. And he's just one of those rare politicians when they're actually talking, they're actually saying interesting things.
It is interesting when he talks about how to speak with people, when he does speak with people who aren't already in the Democratic fold or the liberal fold, about values and reclaiming religion, taking on Mike Pence from his own state about claiming you're a Christian and you're following Christian values when you're discriminating against gay people.
Right. But the point is, like, he's actually interesting to listen to. He's insightful.
He is. That's what I mean. He's good on that.
And on any topic. And that's relatively rare in politics. I have 3 criteria for politicians I like: smart, actually give a crap, not crazy, right? And there's very few people that score high on all 3 of those, right?
How many of the Democratic case do, in your opinion?
Oh, to varying extents, they all do. I mean, they're all. I mean, I would even vote for Tulsi Gabbard
Really?
over Trump. Yeah,
Over Trump,
I totally
maybe.
would. Yeah.
She's tricky because of the cult she's in, because of relationship with Assad, because the
No,
white nationalists got him on her on the
Yeah, no, I totally
debates.
get that.
Yeah.
But I and her dad and she were like president of the We Hate Gays Club in Hawaii. Her dad's a state senator there. And but all right, fine. But I don't think she's crazy. And
I think she might be.
Well, depending on how you define it, but of them all, she's probably the closest,
Right.
the furthest out on that.
So you could vote for any of them over Trump.
Continue.
So, Pete, so how important was it that he's openly gay? The first openly gay major contender, kisses his husband on TV.
I think it's very cool, obviously. And the most interesting thing is, like, most people seem to not really care about that.
It's really
part. The
interesting.
criticism against him is related to other stuff. And if anything, in the gay community, some of my friends, including my husband, think I'm like the straightest gay guy ever. But in the gay community, a lot of people seem to be resentful because he's not gay enough, right? There's a fair amount of that going on. But I mean, not unlike myself, he always knew he was gay, and it was I was like 40 before I started to do anything about it, if you know what I mean. And I was already in elective office, and so there was but I think in a way that sort of it's an experience to go through. It's not in any way comparable to being African American or an immigrant or what but I'm just saying it's very interesting to see him articulate his own experience in this regard, and what compelled him to come out, and how happy he is now that he's done it, and
It's a compelling story.
it's a great story. But I mean, the bottom line is, I think all of the Democratic candidates want to end up in the same place, right?
Yeah.
Universal health care, Green New Deal. I mean, we're all, the real question to me is, like, do you seem like you have a realistic plan to get from here to there? And
Mhm.
I have a career of being an incrementalist, right? And I think that's the only practical way of getting stuff accomplished. And I think
What would be an example of issues you worked in that, like criminal justice?
well, gun control, criminal justice, gay marriage. I mean, like for example, on the gay marriage topic here in Connecticut, marriage equality. In 2005, we enacted civil unions, and we were the first state legislature to do it in the country without some court telling us we had to do it. And when that was happening, Andrew McDonald, who was the co-chair with me, who was also a gay guy, we got a lot of very serious pushback from the gay organizations around the country who said, like, this is second-class citizen, you shouldn't do it. And we said, well, we can get this enacted today and signed into law by a Republican governor, and it guarantees all the exact same rights that everybody else has.
So is that why even if you might be for single payer, I don't know if you are.
I'm for single payer, yeah.
But that you think the only thing that'll get passed first is Medicare for all who want it, meaning that nobody has to give up health care so you can make it an easier sell?
Yeah, well, and again, I'm not speaking for the campaign, but my take on what Mayor Pete says is, he goes, look, sooner or later, we're going to end up with a single payer system. The question is, how long is it going to take us to get there? And my proposal is, for now, let's do Medicare for all who want it, right? So that way, because there's a lot of people who have really good health insurance, like I do as a state retiree, and so many people would say, well, wait a minute, you're going to take that away from me and give me something I'm not even familiar with, and so in the meantime, do it. And then if you have the public option out there, and a lot of people are taking advantage of it, and people understand what it is and what it's not, then over time people will gravitate towards it, and we see this in all other industrial countries in the world, and I think he's just saying, like, that's how you get there, right? You don't just mandate it, and if you do the all or nothing strategy, it's always guaranteed to be successful. You're either going to get all or nothing, and more likely than not, you're going to get nothing. And so, I mean, in criminal justice stuff, I mean, I could go through the litany of changes that have happened over the past 30 years that I was happy to be a part of, but they're step by step by step, and that's how you do it. Same thing with
Let me give you a lightning round of things people say against Pete. Worked for McKinsey, not upfront about his clients. Do you want, what's that all about?
Well, I guess he did work for McKinsey. It was his first job out of college. My first job out of college was a prosecutor. I think if you say, like, oh, well, he's got a prosecutor mentality, I don't know. Maybe
no one's brought up any evidence they did anything wrong, McKinsey. I actually thought
Benjamin Applebaum was like an entry-level job.
Benjamin Applebaum was really relentless on him in that New York Times interview. Did you read that exchange at McKinsey? I thought that was a low for the top.
Well, I think that was a test because from what I gather, they were trying to, because he's like the Obama style, no drama, kind of, you can't get him rattled. I think they were trying to jerk his chain to see if he would react and what he'd be like if he was really pissed.
I loved when Trump called him Alfred E. Newman, and he said, sorry, I don't get the reference. Old guy.
Yeah, right, yeah.
What about inexperience? He's 38 years old. He's never gotten more votes than Justin Ellicker in an election. When makes you think that he could suddenly get, tens of millions of votes and become the president of the United States?
Well, I mean, to me, I'm not sure I've ever seen someone who seems better prepared for the job, just from a intellect point of view and a maturity point of view, right? A lot of the people who have a lot of experience, have experience as legislators, and I can say from firsthand experience, there's a lot of legislators I know, myself included, which I don't think should ever be chief executive of anything, right? Because it's a different skill set. That's what campaigns are for. People are going to test this, right? And you can't, another argument they make against me is they say he has no African-American support. Well, he has some, but not as much as maybe
he's got to go and win it. He's got to go.
Yeah, that's what the campaign is for. So you're either going to get it or you're not. And if you don't do it, you're not going to be president. So
what about Amy Klobuchar's point that if he was a woman, there's no way with your level of experience you'd even be on the stage?
I don't know about that.
The answer to that to make sure that women can be more included rather than different kinds of men not be allowed in?
There's no question that women in politics face enormous obstacles, right? I mean, there's no one can argue that point, right? And okay, maybe that's true, but he is who he is, and he's a candidate, and people can choose who they want to vote for.
I love some of his take, and I'm with you that any Democrat, except for Tulsi Gabbard, is going to basically make a major change on so many major issues, from healthcare to the role of money in politics to criminal justice to that. That's sort of the big question. But one concern I've heard from people about Pete Buttigieg, why they're not supporting him. is that he's flip-flopped. He started out as a left-wing candidate, such as single payer, and that when there was an opening to be a moderate, he changed lanes.
I mean, I don't know what these distinctions to me are distinctions. Like I said, I'm a liberal, right? There's no question about it. But like in a different spectrum, I'd call myself center left, right? And then, in the European system, there's actual parties that represent these different gradients of stuff. But we don't have that here, right? So, but I think basically everybody wants to get to the same place. They have different strategies to get there. Now, but I just want to make a very practical point about picking a Democratic nominee for president. Like, for starters, I want someone who's going to be there for 8 years because it's going to take a while to reorient the country. That's number one. Number two.
That's the thing. When you win, it's hard to win, but then you have advantages of an incumbent, which is, I don't understand the people for Biden and Sanders, why you would talk about electing someone with the intention of it being only one term.
Yeah,
because then it's so hard to keep
correct.
And you need the 8 years to name judges and enact policies.
Right. And number two, someone's gonna have to at least try and heal the country, right? And after World War II, the United States, in a brilliant move, enacted the Marshall Plan, which was okay. Our former enemies, some of them are really bad, some of them are complicit, some of them hate us, but we're going to have to find a way to bring them back into the fold. We're going to have to reach out to them, address their concerns in a totally different way than we did after World War I with, the Treaty of Versailles, and so. And I think someone's going to have to sort of reach out to the Trump supporters because
flyover country.
Well, they have a lot of legitimate concerns.
Yeah.
I think they think the solutions are. I think their approach to solving those problems are wrongheaded. But unless there's real problems, they need to be addressed. And if it's just like us versus them for 4 years, it's not going to go anywhere. The other thing, and by the way, some of these candidates are maybe not old enough to survive intact in a full 8 years of incumbency. And the other thing is, like, the two principal candidates, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, both of them I think would be great and I'd be happy to campaign for. But, they're both incumbent Democratic senators in states with Republican governors. And should either one of them become president, they're going to be replaced by a Republican. And, one of the key ingredients to changing gears in the country is to also have the Senate allied with the president. And God forbid it ends up a 50-50 tie with a Democratic president who then has to step down to turn it into a 51-vote Republican majority.
Some stuff I'm getting here. How can he win without the black vote? Your answer was that's what
primaries
primaries are for. He's got to earn it.
He's got to earn it.
And wouldn't 8 years of incrementalism be virtually equal to one term of far left policies?
If the far left, if you could make it happen,
pass him.
Yeah, if you could pass him. But I don't think there's any indication you can get anything like that through any Congress that looks remotely like the current one. As you
mentioned, you were in your 40s when you came out, correct?
Correct.
And you were already an elected state legislator.
I got elected when I was 29.
You come from East Haven, which has a reputation of being a very bigoted place.
Yeah.
What was that like? How'd you do it?
Well, nobody in East Haven cared about that topic.
Really? Nobody? You really didn't get crap about that?
Not at all. None.
They just thought you were too pro-African-American? Was that a bigger deal? On criminal justice?
I remember in my campaigns that there was campaign mailers against me showing buses coming into the beach club down, the one that used to be the one's owned by Len Fasano now, yeah. And there was a cartoon against me that said a school bus that said Inner City Bus Company on the outside coming into, and so East Haven, it's been a real issue there for quite. It's a lot different today than it was before. But I have to say, I live in New Haven now. I've got a family. We've got an 11-year-old kid at Nathan Hale School, and one of the many reasons we decided to live in New Haven was better schools, which is the exact opposite.
Yeah, why
the perception when I was growing up.
Yeah. Well, East Haven did change. You just say there was the court order. There's more Latinos living there.
The East Haven Police Department's come around. We monitor all this data. It's really interesting, and it completely contradicts all the crap we heard from some folks in the law enforcement community. Like if East Haven is forced to do all these things, crime is going to go up. The cops won't arrest anybody. It's been the exact opposite. Like the crime rate in East Haven has plummeted. There's no more racial.
And East Haven went for Obama in 2008, didn't it?
Yeah, but
not 2012.
Not in 2016. No, at both times.
They went for Obama in 2012 too.
I believe so. Yeah, and
okay.
But not in 2016.
But then they went for Trump.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of tells you something, right?
It does. It does.
What does it tell you?
Well, that East Haven is like a lot of the country.
What does that tell you about the country when people went those ways? That the people who went both ways.
As I said earlier, I think that Trump was able to exploit a very clear emotion in the country, and he did it I think, a very cynical way. But there's a lot of people hurting in this country, and the blame for their pain has been deflected onto so-called elites and immigrants and African Americans and the gays and everybody else who, like I've got this philosophy. Okay, now just to be clear, I am white. I'm a white guy from East Haven, but I think there's a lot of people who grew up middle class like I did, who felt sort of an entitlement to a very comfortable life, with a secure pension and retirement. And it's so,
by the way, I think people are entitled to a secure retirement.
I do too, but I think
not racial entitlement.
The way the
economy,
way the economy has evolved. I mean, there's very few, what do you call it, defined benefit retirement plans and health insurance and everything else like that. And I think if you want to, you can exploit the
way I feel is I'm not angry at public workers for having that. I wish I had one too.
Yeah, and
I think and
everybody should have it. But the point is, like, I think people just sort of blame immigrants or blame African Americans or blame welfare or blame the elites or blame the media for all these phenomena, when it's just the way the economy has evolved over time. And like I think there's 4 factors that contribute to Trumpism. I refer to it as FARC. Fear, anger, resentment, credulity. Put those 4 things together. I think that kind of explains Trumpism, and so good luck on doing that.
Well,
maybe Mayor Pete
enjoy
can do it.
Getting up to date on Lawlerism.
Sorry?
I enjoyed getting up to date on Lawlerism.
Oh, there you go.
I learned so much every time I talk to you, Mike. I learned how much I don't know, but I also learned a lot I didn't know. And it was so great to chat with you on Dateline New Haven. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for the
So
invite.
we're not going to see you on the hustings with Mayor Pete?
Maybe. I don't know. But I'm dedicated to the University of New Haven right now. I love it.
All right.
I'm staying there until
awesome.
I die.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us in WNHH. Thanks for the comments. And thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. And thanks to the miracle man behind the controls, WNHH station manager, Harry Drugs. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.